In this lesson, we'll learn how to create a specular map for our game character. Alright, fantastic. So we're ready to go ahead and create a specular map. Now, the specular map needs to go on its own channel here inside of Mari, and we haven't actually created a channel for that yet. So let's just come over here and tap on this button in our Channels palette, and I'll go ahead and name this Specular. You can drop that down and choose your recent names. So I'll go ahead and make it the same size, and I am going to go ahead and set this over to scalar. So we're really only going to use black and white data from this channel. So let's go ahead and create a specular channel for just the character only object. I don't necessarily need a specular channel for the eyelashes or for the lenses and the glasses. So now with that channel created, we can come over here and open up the layer stack for it. I'm just going to go ahead and snap it in right here, and you can see I'm getting quite a few open down here, so I'm just going to go ahead and close out the history palette. So but I've got the specular layer stack open right here. Now when it comes to the specular map, it needs to plug into our shader right over here. So we'll go ahead and plug it in under the specular color, just like so. And you can see, well, we had a subtle change here, but what happened? Well, let's look at the contents of that specular channel. So if we hold the I key down, we can select that channel, and then we can view just the current channel. And you can see that by default, that specular channel is black. So basically that's telling Mari no specular highlights at all. So that's what we saw. We saw a subtle shift in the specular highlights. They actually got taken completely off. So that's not in fact what we want though. So let's come back over here to our layer stack. Now what we can do here is we can borrow from our diffuse to help us create this specular map. So we've got things like dirt, hair, skin, and clothing here, all of which we can borrow. So I tell you what, let's just go ahead and collapse all of these groups. I'm going to select them all here, and I'm going to hold down the Alt key, and I'm just going to simply drag them over. Just like so. So what I've done essentially is I've made copies of all of that data, that painted data, right over here. Now this is a performance nightmare if you're duplicating all your diffuse into your specular. So the next step we need to take is we need to start flattening some of this stuff down. So the dirt only has one layer in it, so we don't need to flatten that. Hair only has one layer. Skin has lots of layers, so let's go ahead and flatten these guys. We'll go ahead and come in here, select all of these by holding down the Shift key, and I'm just simply going to right click and choose to merge layers. Now when I do that, it basically merges them down to a single layer. All of that is flattened into that layer. We'll do the same thing down here for clothing. We'll come down here. I'm going to leave the glasses on their own layer, but in terms of the rest of the clothing, let's just select all of it here and merge it together. Fantastic. Now, if I hold down the I key, you'll notice I am on the current channel, but we're seeing color data here. Now, it's going to help us make better decisions in terms of the specular map if we come in here and add an adjustment layer at the very top. So I'm going to come in here and add an adjustment layer for luminosity. That's going to basically convert everything below to black and white data. All right, fantastic. Now let's think about specularity in terms of clothing. All of the clothes that we flattened onto this single layer right here, we really don't want much of a specular highlight on that clothing at all. In fact, if any, it needs to be something that really diffuses and spreads out. So it's really not noticeable much at all. So what I'd like to do for the clothing, let's go ahead and switch over here to face selection mode and smart selection. I'm going to come in here and just drag a marquee selection around a lot of this. Now that's going to select his head as well, so we'll want to hold down the S key, Control, and then click on the head. And let's make sure we got the back. We did. Let's come down here and hold Shift and add the shoes. So I should have all of the clothing selected at this point. So now the shoes are going to be a little different. We'll handle those in just a moment. But in terms of this information, let's just go ahead and paint it a solid color. So we'll come over to our basic brushes, choose something hard like that. Let's go ahead and turn off the flow, ramp that up. And it's easier to do this in the UV view because we can zoom out like that, hold down the shift, or rather the S key, and we can just come in and paint that in really quickly. Now let's check out what color I'm painting first here. Let me go ahead and tap on this here. You can see this is a really dark value. Now we could paint this completely black, but that'll tell the specular map no specular highlight at all. So instead of going completely black, I'm going to go with a really, really dark gray. You can see here I'm at about 0.8. There we go. We'll just go ahead and paint that in. And we'll go ahead and let's make sure we have the correct layer selected before we bake. Clothing, layer 2, yep, that'll work. We'll go ahead and bake that down. And back over in the orthographic view, you can see here what we've painted. If we go into a flat shaded mode, you can see here that really we've painted kind of a flat color on top of all that. Now we've got the dirt here. That's creating a little bit more of a shiny area in terms of kind of that lighter gray color. I'll probably go ahead and hide that. Dirt's not shiny. So that's basically what we're looking at for our clothes at this moment. Now let's handle the really important area in terms of specular highlights next. Let's go ahead and handle the skin. So here's our skin and all the painted data that is on that particular layer. We flattened it down. I'm going to come in and add an adjustment stack to that. And I'm going to start it off with a levels adjustment. Now we'll want to go ahead and tap on this guy. And I'll go ahead and drag him over just a little bit so we can pin him down. And just kind of zoom in here, and we'll look at the face as sort of a baseline, because the face is so important. So when it comes to the levels, I'm going to come over here and we'll just scroll down. I want to really limit the white output. So I'm going to drag this down to, we'll start off at about a 0.5. Something like that. Now that's kind of a murky gray. And I don't want specular highlights everywhere here. There's really only certain areas I want those, and they're going to be kind of around the brow, maybe the nose, some areas like that. So I'm going to go ahead and shift the midpoint in our levels. I'm going to go ahead and shift that to the right a little bit so we can darken up some of the areas that we don't want highlights in. So we'll go up to something like, let's go up to right about 0.6, something like that. Now at this point, we're really dark, but this area up here is still a little bit lighter. So I'm going to go ahead and add another adjustment here. Let's go ahead and add a contrast adjustment. There we go. Now with the contrast adjustment, we can come in and we can beef up the contrast, but we may also need to address the pivot. So you can see here, in adjusting the contrast, it's basically blacking everything out. So let's adjust the pivot and pull it down a little bit. We'll pull it down there to, I don't know, right about there. And then we'll start to beef up the contrast a little bit more here. We may need to come back over to our levels and adjust that white out a little bit. Let's go ahead and pull that back up, and now you can start to see some of those lighter values coming in here on the brow. So we'll kind of go back and forth between our contrast and our levels, kind of looking for kind of that happy medium. Let's go ahead and jump back to our shader for the time being. Hold down the I key and select that from the shaders column inside that channel pop-up. I'll go ahead and turn on my lighting here. And if we want to, let's go ahead and close that out, jump back over to our shader, check our specularity here. And if we reset that, you're going to see here that the specular highlights come back only in areas and only in a very limited fashion at this point. So at this point, you can kind of look at his brow. Let's reset the roughness, start to dial that down. You can start to see his brow has a little bit of that shininess to it that we're going for. Just kind of adjust these a little bit. There we go. You can start to see that's really, really shiny, probably too shiny. So we probably want to go ahead and pull that down some, as well as the specular. Just kind of begin to adjust that. And if we need to, if we want to begin to introduce a little bit more specular highlights into some of these other areas of the face, we could again come into our adjustment stack and begin to manipulate those two adjustments that we've made here. Now, in terms of the rest of the specularity, I'll come in probably and tweak those a little bit in between lessons, but what I'd like to do is come in and really kind of come in and start to paint some of this area that we actually do want specular highlights in. So for example, the buttons. So if we come down here and look at the pants, got several pieces of metal there that would probably reflect some amount of light. So let's come in and select that clothing layer that we painted that really dark gray in. Select our paint tool, and I'll just go ahead and grab again that hard round brush. Shrink that guy down. I want to come in with sort of a lighter gray here, and we'll just start to paint in these buttons. You can see a little bit of that specular highlight comes in, even without orbiting around. So if I start to move around, those are going to start to reflect a little bit more light. So we can come in and paint a few here and here. Maybe a little bit over here. I'm not going to worry about that one. If we want these to be shinier, we can come in and paint the little buttons on his shirt. We get that a little bit better coverage there. Now the last thing I'd like to paint in terms of the specular map is his glasses. I'm kind of working my way up to those at this point, just basically kind of hitting each one of these little buttons on his shirt, imagining that those are some kind of a metal button. And there we go. Now we're up to his glasses. So now the glasses, I've got a layer here for those. Let's go ahead and hold down the S key. Let's drag a little more key around the glass geometry, or the glasses geometry rather. Come over here, tap that guy there. Now for these, it's going to be easier in the UV view, because we can just come over here and paint that really quickly. So for these, let's go ahead and start off with the same color we just painted for the buttons. So kind of a light gray color. And you can see here that really, well, it looks like we just painted a diffuse color for those glasses. That's not specularity right there. So let's do this. Let's go ahead and hide that layer really quickly. And we'll come back over here, hit the I key, go back to our color map. Let's go ahead and look at those glasses here. We'll just go to the current paint target. Pretty similar in color. They're kind of a gray color. So let's go ahead and maybe color those a darker color here. Let me just make sure I have that geometry selected, have the current layer selected, make sure I'm on the proper channel here, and we'll jump in here. And let me just go ahead and choose kind of a dark brown. A little more desaturated than that. Well, something like that. And we'll bake that down. Okay, so let's go ahead and go back to our shader. There we go. That's looking a bit better. Now the specularity that we painted on this layer is going to affect that dark brown color for his frames. So now I may even go a little shinier than that, depending on how shiny you want those frames to be. And again, like I said, I may come in here and fiddle a little bit more with the adjustment stack that we created here for the skin, just until I get something I'm rather happy with in terms of specularity. Right now I feel like it's a little too shiny up here, not quite as shiny down here as I'd like it. So I'm going to work with balancing that contrast and levels adjustment in between lessons. But in the next lesson, I want to talk a little bit about painting a transparency map for the hair on this character.